Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I am making this podcast as a re-evaluation of the points I made in the podcast that I made, I believe it was yesterday, on those two dreams that I had about the failing possibly of electricity and on the breakdown of one or more power grids. What I said in prefacing that podcast was that it had nothing to do with Marxism or communism. I have since been rethinking that and realizing that Roy Bhaskar, which I actually did mention in that podcast, which is why I'm not sure I said what I said, that Roy Bhaskar was a mystic of sorts. He developed a kind of approach to critical realism, which he called the philosophy of meta-reality. Now, I have taken his philosophy of meta-reality and, paraphrasing Marx, turns it upside down on its head. Of course, Marx meant that in relationship to Hegel. I mean that in relationship to Roy Bhaskar. But I'm talking about something quite different. What I am referring to is that in the philosophy of meta-reality, Roy argued that there was such a thing that he referred to as the cosmic envelope. And that was his way of describing the relationship between the spiritual and the material aspects of the universe. When I first read it, I thought, gee, this is interesting. And then I began coming across articles written by other critical realists, which were very critical of the cosmic envelope. And the criticism basically was this: that Roy had reverted from realism to idealism because the cosmic envelope assumes that the ethereal exists on the exterior and the more mundane exists on the interior. If you make that kind of assumption, what you are left with is a kind of ontological idealism, because you're saying that the heart of reality is mundane, is physical, and it becomes less mundane as one reaches the ethereal or spiritual envelope. That was the critique, and I think it was a legitimate critique of the philosophy of meta-reality. So what I have done is I took the cosmic envelope, and as I said, I literally turned it upside down on its head. And I changed the name from cosmic envelope to cosmic interior. Originally, I said deep cosmic interior, but then I realized that the word deep was unnecessary, so I dropped off the word deep and began just calling it the cosmic interior. Okay. What I did is I said that the more interior one gets, the more ethereal, not the more mundane, but the more ethereal things become. The more exterior things get, the more mundane they become. So basically, the ethereal, in my view, is on the surface. I'm sorry, the ethereal is in the interior, and the mundane is on the surface. See, I'm confusing myself. It's the exact opposite of what Roy Bhaskar said. This is very, very confusing stuff. Roy himself found it rather confusing. He was constantly changing his mind on this stuff because you're dealing with things that cannot really be directly observed. This is really purely speculative phenomena. And speculation is hard to talk about in language. It simply is. So let me go ahead and repeat that so it's clear. To Roy, the mundane is in the interior. The ethereal is in the exterior. To me, the ethereal is in the interior, and the mundane is in the exterior. And then you have grades of ethereal and material in between them, both in Roy Bhaskar's system and in my own. But I think what I have done is I have corrected Roy Bhaskar's ontological idealism into ontological realism. In other words, I have restored the philosophy of meta-reality to what I believe is its proper place in the philosophy of critical realism. Roy said that meta-reality was the final stage of critical realism. Now, as I've said before, whether that was true, no one knows. People will often say, I have reached the final stage. This is the culmination of my ideas, until they come up with some new idea. And then all of that is thrown out the window, and they begin going along some other line or making additions that perhaps they did not conceive of at the time when they were making the statement. So I have no idea whether that would have been the end of critical realism the way Roy explained it. What I can say is that I, as an individual scholar, a critical realist, have been working on extending the philosophy of critical realism and the philosophy of meta-reality, which again is the final stage of it, beyond what Roy Bhaskar did. Whether Roy would have done that, I don't know, but I am doing that right now. Okay, so that's kind of a preface to where I want to go with this. That's not the main point, but that's a preface to it. If we make that assumption that there is this cosmic interior, and that the further away you get from it, meaning like the closer you get to the shell or to the envelope, the more things become mundane. Mundane. More mundane on the exterior, less mundane on the interior. That is my view, the opposite of what Roy Bhaskar said. So given that I say that, I think that one has something to work with from a critical realist perspective. Therefore, what I would say is that the two dreams I reported can be looked at as examples of the action of the cosmic envelope. That's a roundabout way of saying it, isn't it? That the cosmic envelope reinterpreted as the cosmic interior is the structure of reality. Reality is the cosmic interior. That is the way in which reality exists. That is the ultimate way of explaining reality, as a cosmic interior. In my view, that is the direction that Roy was going in. Sadly, he died, in my opinion, too soon to bring that project to fruition. I would like to hope that had Roy lived longer, past 70, that he might have come up with similar ideas to the one that I just presented. Obviously, I have no way of knowing that. I am only speculating, purely speculating. But here's what I can say, that my dream, or my dreams, I should say, that I had about the power grid, about electricity, both failing, came, I think, from somewhere in this cosmic interior. And they were expressed to me so that I was able to reflect on them after I woke up into a state of consciousness which is closer to the exterior. That is the way that I see it. The interior, ethereal, the exterior, mundane. And so when I put all that stuff together, to me, my experience or experiences are very much in line with Roy Bhaskar's experiences that he talks about in his philosophy of meta-reality, along with the preface to that called Transcendental Dialectical Critical Realism. Some people have combined those two together into one. I think that is misleading. I'm not going to say it's incorrect, because that would be too judgmental, and I don't want to put myself in a position of judging what is and what is not correct. All I can say is that is not how I look at it, at least not how I look at it right now. Okay, so let's end that for the time being. We may come back to it, but I want to establish that as a foundation. Basically, to say that I think that my dream is in full alignment with the philosophy of critical realism and the philosophy of meta-reality, especially as redesigned by myself. And there's nothing that a scholar likes more, including me, than looking at the work of her or his mentor and being able to work on it and hopefully to make it better. And I think that's what I have done in transforming the cosmic envelope into the cosmic interior, or transforming Roy's ontological idealism into ontological realism, because Roy was an ontological realist. After all, his philosophy is called critical realism, not critical idealism. And so I think it is legitimate to see Roy's late work on the cosmic envelope, I was going to say as a betrayal, but that may be too harsh, but certainly as a backtrack from his work, his earlier work in critical realism. And I see it as being inconsistent. You can't have a cosmic envelope and critical realism. Those two are, in my view anyway, incompatible. But you can have critical realism and a cosmic interior, because in my view anyway, those two are extremely compatible. So let's get back to those dreams, which I think again came from the cosmic interior. Both of them dealt with disasters related to electricity. I had another rather interesting dream today. Now, I'm not one for weird dreams. I don't usually have them. But when I have them, they are usually very weird. And this one was very weird as well. I said to myself, well, I am going to an online Zoom meeting tonight, which actually has been canceled and rescheduled for tomorrow night. But I didn't know that at the time because the person who was supposed to tell me forgot. So I literally just found out about half an hour ago. So I decided I would take a nap before the meeting that we were supposed to originally have this evening. Here's the thing. I laid down on the bed, and that is the last thing that I remember. Literally, the last thing I remember. Now, I generally don't have problems going to sleep. I have been taking sleeping pills, but not really because I need them, but because I like the way they make me feel. I mean, after all, sleeping pills are controlled substances. They are sometimes called hypnotics. They are mind-altering drugs, and taking them can be very pleasant. I know that I find taking sleeping pills to be very enjoyable. And so I went to lay down in the bed earlier this evening, maybe around 6 o'clock or so. And I literally went to sleep instantaneously. When I say instantaneously, I mean instantaneously. I don't think there was a gap at all between my laying down in my bed on my right side of my right cheek and being asleep. I think I went to sleep at the same time as that. I don't recall ever having experienced that. Now, here is the odd part of it. That part of it is, I guess, a little odd, but not that odd. I started hearing this friend of mine, I thought, breathing very, very heavily, like that. And I said to him, calling him by name, which I won't use here, but calling him by his name, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And all he could do was to keep on breathing heavily. So then I said, if you don't stop and tell me what's going on, I am going to call 911. At that point, I woke up, but I didn't understand what I was waking up from. Because as with many dreams, dreams often seem like they're real when you're having them, no matter how odd they are, and this was no exception. So I did wake up, but the first thing I noticed was that I was not holding a phone. There was no phone in my hand. So I thought, well, how could I have just been having that conversation with this fellow if I was not holding a phone? So I went into the kitchen where I, at that point, was charging the cell phone. And there the phone was in its vertical charger. And I was even more confused than I was before. And so I realized, I said, well, I guess I was dreaming, but I didn't know I was dreaming. Yeah, I was dreaming, but I didn't know I was dreaming. And when I woke up, I thought nothing had changed. That part of it is not unusual. The unusual part is the fact that I thought I was holding a phone when I wasn't. The phone all the time was not in bed with me in the bedroom, in the master bedroom. Sometimes I'll sleep in the other bedroom too, but usually I sleep in the master bedroom. But the phone was actually in the charger in the kitchen. I don't know how to explain that. I did speak with this fellow on the phone, and just as I told him about the two dreams I had about electricity or the power grid, I told him about this dream that I had of him. Here's what I can say. Roy took his mystical experiences very, very seriously. I sometimes find it hard to do so, which is why I said that this podcast is not related to Marxism or communism or to Maoism, third worldism, or critical realism, because I simply felt uncomfortable with connecting those experiences to critical realism until today. After I had that dream that I had today about my friend breathing heavily, and then his breathing suddenly stopped. Because I guess I feel that when I'm talking about communism and Marxism, I should not be talking about mystical experiences or whatever you want to call them. I should put them in separate categories. I should engage in intentional compartmentalization, which is exactly what I did yesterday. I compartmentalized them. And so I made it clear that what I was about to talk about had nothing to do with the usual topics in this podcast. That, I think, was my mistake, because I think they have everything to do with the usual topics in this podcast. I was just neglecting the fact that Roy was a mystic. I mean, for that matter, so am I, in a sense. I mean, I'm not a mystic in the sense that I regularly have mystical experiences, although I have had my share. I've talked about one or two before. like the one with the maiden, for example. So I have had them, but I don't have them on a regular basis. They're not commonplace for me. But what I think I need to do is to be more open to the possibility of dreams and other mystical experiences, if you want to call them dreams mystical experiences, which they are to me, because I see them as visionary experiences, in all honesty. I decided I would be honest about this and blunt about it before I was keeping this to myself in this podcast. I will no longer do that. I'm ending the compartmentalization. It's gone. I will admit my interests in mysticism, just as Roy Bhaskar ultimately had to admit his after his trip to India. Now, were there consequences to that? Oh, yeah. Loads and loads of Roy's, I don't know, followers is the right word, adherents, disciples, well, that's not the right word at all, but loads of critical realists who followed the ideas of Roy Bhaskar left critical realism, many in extreme anger. Now, do I understand that? Yes. And I think Roy did too. He would have had to. Generally speaking, again, is this always true? No. But generally speaking, Marxists and mystics do not go together to the same parties, whatever. They are not generally in the same category. They are considered separately. And so, in other words, most Marxists are not mystics, and most mystics are not Marxists. I think that should be obvious. But Roy was an exception. Was he the only exception? No. There have been many exceptions, although, in my opinion, Roy was the most profound of those exceptions. He was really an exception, talking about his past lives as about half of one of his books, which even to me right now seems crazy. Not only because I don't believe in reincarnation, that's a side point, but to devote half a book to talking about your past lives, I mean, the thought kept on occurring to me, Roy, how do you know this? He was just describing his past lives in excruciating detail. Who he was, what his name was, what he was doing. It was weird. It was really, really weird. Some people thought that Roy had lost his mind. I spoke with one person like that who believed that. Now, did I ever think that Roy had lost his mind? No, because as a sociologist of religion, I have known a lot of people who were mystics. And I am a mystic myself as a part-time job. That's something that I have done since I was a child, when I established my own religion of soulology. And throughout my development, when I became increasingly mystical at the same time, as I was becoming increasingly a dialectical materialist and a Marxist. Now, if those two things seem inconsistent, I guess they are. I guess they are. But I am not going to compartmentalize them, because to me, the key to understanding, and there's nothing to add to that. The key to understanding, period, is appreciating ambiguity. There are a lot of people who are genuinely afraid of ambiguity, so they can't conceive how someone could be a Marxist and a mystic. It makes no sense to them. And again, I can understand the reason for that. I can understand that as a sociologist of religion, as a social theorist. That makes perfect sense to me. But it also makes perfect sense to me how somebody could be a Marxist and a mystic, just as Roy Bhaskar was, and just as I am. And so I no longer feel any need to separate those two parts of my life in this podcast. Now, that said, one aspect of my life that I will still keep in a separate compartment is my religion. But that is for a different reason. My religion is not a secret. Anybody who Googles my name can find out my religion. It has never been a secret. I am not a secretive person. I'm a very open person about basically everything. Somebody asks me a question, I would answer it. My students would ask me a question, I would give them an honest answer. And I imagine sometimes they thought the answer was weird, but all I could say is, well, if the dean asks me why I said that, I could say, well, I didn't bring it up. A student asked me that question, and I gave an honest answer. And I think that would be a legitimate explanation. It would be a legitimate explanation. I mean, I wouldn't bring up mysticism in my classes before I retired. I think that would be inappropriate. But in response to a question, sure, why not? Why not? It's called honesty. And autistics are notoriously honest. And autistics notoriously despise dishonesty. There's one person who lives here in this condo complex who lied to me about a year ago. I'm not going to say what the lie is. It's not really relevant. Plus, I'm afraid if I say it, maybe it'll get back to her. Chances of that happening are extraordinarily remote, but I still won't say it. Till this day, it's not that I won't forgive her, but I can't forget that she lied to me. And so when I talk to her, I always talk to her knowing that she is a liar. That's a common thing for autistics. I despise lying. Despise it more than almost anything else in the world. Almost, not everything. Capitalism would be higher up. But I do despise lying, and I can't stand people when they lie to me. And she blatantly lied to me, and I know why. So it's not just that I know she lied, I know why she lied, and it was purely for selfish motives. So these dreams that I had yesterday, 2 of them, maybe 4 hours separating them, and the one today, which I seem to have instantly on laying on the bed, which is odd, made me realize that to continue to separate the mystical mark from the Maoist third worldist mark would be inconsistent with the critical realist mark. And if I am to be a single person, as I think we all must be, we can't be divided personalities and then claim to be honest, and then claim to be respectable, and then expect people to have confidence in what we are saying. So from this point forward, I will be honest about my experiences, but not honest about my religion, because I just feel that honestly, I feel that might cause problems for my religion. Not for me, but for my religion. Okay, that's the honest truth. I do not want to cause problems for my religion. So although obviously, if you want to find out for whatever reason what my religion is, you can, but it's not something that I will discuss in this podcast. And if somebody brings the subject up in the comment section, I won't respond to the comments either, because I don't think that that is appropriate, because I respect and love my religion, and I don't want to hurt it. And I think if I started mixing up the stuff that is the bread and butter, even though I'm not making money off of it, but for lack of better expression, the bread and butter of this podcast, the nuts and bolts maybe is better of this podcast, with my religious practice, that might be very damaging to my religion for a whole variety of reasons, and there's no need to get into them, but take my word for it. It could be very damaging. So I simply won't do it. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.